Hello and Yalimut everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, which is titled The Role of Struggle, Hope, and Happiness in Islam, to be presented by Alvaiza Irfa Alani. I am Alvaiza Salima Versi, and I will be the facilitator for this webinar today. It'll be around 45 minutes, an hour long. We're going to have the first part, the TED-style presentation. That'll be about 20 minutes. And then we're going to have just a chat, Irfa and I, for probably about another 20 minutes. Before we get started, I wanted to go over a few things. So first of all, I want to thank you all for taking time to be here with us today, to explore, to be curious, to get inspired. We also want to thank the volunteers and the resources that make these kinds of webinars possible. And of course, to Alvaiza Irfa for spending time and being here and sharing her thoughts with us. And I also wanted to tell you a little bit about Alvaiza herself. So Irfa is a graduate of the Institute of Ismaili Studies International Vaizine Training Program. She is an executive coach and a fellow at the Global Institute for Trust. She is currently serving as interim executive officer for Invest Ontario, which is a newly created board-led independent agency focused on attracting and securing quality business investments into the province. Irfa has actually spent more than 20 years working on issues related to strategy, trade, investment attraction, governance, supply chain, shared services, privacy, data, and intangible economy. The coolest thing, I think, is that she represented Canada at the CUSMA, which used to be NAFTA, which is what NAFTA used to be, and the CETA trade negotiations. And also between 2012 and 2017, she served as a liaison officer for AKDN in Uganda. And between 2005 and 2008, she was the in-house counsel for Imara Sussex Drive and Imara Winford Drive, which were the companies that oversaw the construction of the Ismaili Center, the Aga Khan Museum, and the delegation of the Ismaili Imamat. She has an LLM from the American University in Washington, an LLB from Osgoode Hall, a BSc from the U of T, and a postgraduate certificate in leadership development from Harvard Business School and diplomacy from the Diplo Foundation. So she is incredibly talented and very, very qualified. And we are looking forward to hearing her share her thoughts on struggle and hope and happiness and what that means for us right now, sort of 15, 18 months into the pandemic. So welcome Alvaiza Irfa.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I'm actually talking to you from the past, so Yali Madad, my brothers and sisters in the future. This segment was pre-recorded a few days ago. So if something of global significance happened this morning, I don't know about it. But I can tell you this, quoting from Maulana Hazri Imam's address at the commencement ceremony at Brown University 25 years ago. I can tell you this. The world is now a different place. It is different from what it was 40 years ago, 5 years ago, even different from last month's world. It is different because we are witnessing a massive acceleration in the rate of global change. We are now 18 months into a global pandemic. We know that too many of us have lost loved ones, have lost their livelihoods. We worry about our children, about their education, about the experiences that they missed, about their connection to our faith. We worry about family and friends who are isolated, who are sick. We worry about all of these things that we don't know, including what happens next. And as human beings, we are uncomfortable with uncertainty. Feelings of fear, of overwhelm, of helplessness. And for some of us, when we feel stuck, we withdraw into our own spaces. But there are things that we do know. We know that the vast majority of people who contract this disease survive. We know vaccines are being rolled out internationally. And we know that in our history, as individuals and as a community, we have overcome various challenges. In our lifetimes, in Uganda, in Afghanistan, in Syria, 50 years after the exodus of Ugandan refugees, old Jamaat Khanas from Kampala to Arusha have reopened. The My flag is being flown at opening ceremonies in Bujagali, for the Serena in the West Nile, and there is a subway station that bears the name Aga Khan being built in Toronto. 700 years after the fall of the Fatimid Empire, the site of the Great Eastern Walls was a garbage dump. And now it is the site of a beautiful park. When we are under pressure, we only see the immediate, time-pressing circumstance in front of us. There's a famous experiment that was conducted on seminary students, people learning to join the priesthood. And the seminary students were told to prepare and deliver a presentation on the parable of the Good Samaritan. For those who don't know, it's the parable where Jesus tells of a traveler who was beaten and robbed and left for half dead. And in this parable, a Jewish priest comes, ignores him, walks past him. A lawyer comes, the same thing. And then a Samaritan comes and helps him. Now, they were telling this story, and they were going to present it, and they were moving from one building to another. Half of the group were told, you know what, take your time. You've got 15 minutes. You'll get there. You can relax and set up. The other half were told, hurry up. You are already late. There's no time. People are waiting for you. And unbeknownst to them, there was an actor on the road who was beaten and injured and asking for help. Now, these were students studying to be priests who were doing a presentation on this very same circumstance. And you know what happened? Those that were told they were in a hurry walked right past, didn't stop to help. The others, more of them stopped to help. So what does this tell us? That even when we know things, we're confronted with what's in front of us. And we know that without a sense of direction, opportunities are lost, doubt, self-absorption sinks in. Just like a home is both the structure, the bricks and the mortar, as well as what you put in it, our lives are both circumstances as well as the meaning that we ascribe to those circumstances. Throughout history, religion has been a source of that meaning. Today, we're going to take a couple of minutes to really talk about Islam, hope, despair, and happiness. Now, I'm going to start 1400 years ago, but I promise if you stick with me, very shortly, we'll talk about what this means for us today. And then after that, Salima and I will have a bit of a chat also about what this means to us as individuals. The first thing I want you to understand is this. Islam is a religion that took form as a social struggle as well as hope for both spiritual and worldly happiness and fulfillment. When he retreated to the cave in Mount Hira, the prophet was on not just a spiritual search. He was on an intellectual search, not just about his own life, but a search for meaning for society in general. Religion is both personal and communal. The early Muslims were a small sect of individuals challenging injustice in the 7th century. Islam was born of an egalitarian ethic, claiming that we all have a common origin and all have a common destiny. And there is this central defining belief about the nature of God. that God is indivisible, absolute, transcendent, and universal. It does not belong to a particular tribe or location. And Islam as a faith did not seek to postpone happiness and justice to the next world. The quest to create a perfect society was for the here and the now. By reframing the way they looked at the world and their place in the world, the early Muslims reframed the way that they experienced it. This quest, this struggle, this search, right, for creating a perfect society, one that is aligned with a particular moral, ethical code. It played itself out during the Prophet's time and through the rise and fall of Muslim civilization since. The word jihad, this imperative that has caused so much misperception, literally translates to the word struggle. Now we know that there are two struggles. There is this inner struggle against the eternal, the personal things that debase us as individuals and take us away from spirit. And then there's this external struggle against injustice and the conditions like poverty, that cause indignity to man and take us away from this place of inherent dignity. Struggle itself is a symptom of hope. It is this imperative to keep going, to find meaning, even through suffering. It is this profound act of courage and of humility. Defeat and victory are in the hands of God, but you are better for the effort. The world is better for the effort. There is a hadith of the Prophet that says, when you see an injustice, you must do something. And if you aren't able to do something, you must say something. And if you cannot say something, you must be sad in your heart. When the Imam speaks of his role and the role of the Aga Khan Development Network, he uses this term. He says it frustrates him that people refer to the work as philanthropy, as something that is being done out of charity. And the Imam has said that no, this is part of the role of the Imam. Part of that role is to protect and advance the inherent dignity of Allah's greatest creation, the dignity of man. And for those of us who are able, it is our privilege and it is our responsibility to ease the suffering of others. Our Imam has told us that the greatest motivator that he knows of is hope, of creating possibility. In his address at Agon College in Switzerland in 2014, Hazrat Imam said, and you will be asking yourselves how, as nano players on the global scene, you could create positive change to happen for yourselves, your families, your peoples. My answer is hope. Fortunately, just as fear can be infectious, so hope is infectious. What an incredible line. Just as fear can be infectious, so hope is infectious. When individuals and families and communities, or even nations, come together around newfound hope, there's new momentum. It can be unstoppable. The smile replaces the frown. Conversation replaces silence. Fear of the future is replaced by confidence to respond to its challenges. The actual process of replacing fear with hope rests with each individual in his or her society. and they can be an enormous source of growing strength and reassurance for one another. I hope that will happen for you. In Islam, the spiritual search for transcendence does not relieve us of our worldly obligations. That's why when the Imam talks about our faith, about Islam, he says that Islam is a way of life. The Holy Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him, was a husband, a widower, a father who lost his sons to death, a businessman, a political leader, a messenger of God, and a role model. In the Ismaili constitution, the role of the Imam is twofold: to light the murid's path to spiritual enlightenment, and in worldly matters, to guide murids to realize their full potential. Living a life of purpose is how we experience divinity. Maulana Sultan Muhammad Shah, peace be upon him, has said, life is not this groveling thing to be sort of endured and suffered through. Life is an exalted and noble destiny. Right? So the second point, Islam is a way of life. The internal and the external are not separate in Islam. Because God is in everything that exists, we can find God in everything that exists. We are whole beings. Neglecting one dimension of our lives impacts the others. Everything is interconnected. We are spiritual beings. A purposeful life is a spiritual life. Finding meaning in everyday experiences transforms them into spiritual experiences. We are physical beings. We are intellectual beings. Curiosity and openness help us to make the most of what life has to offer. Engaging in deep learning and reflection fulfills our potential as rational beings. We are relational beings. Relationships are crucial for a full and fulfilling life. Study after study has shown the number one predictor of happiness is not how much money you make, it's not your social status, it's not even your health. It's the quality of your relationships. And the foundation of healthy relationships starts in having a healthy relationship with ourselves. Our environment impacts the way that we feel, the way that we think, the way that we act, our physical spaces, our choice of words, the programs that we choose to watch, our social landscapes, the people in our lives. We cannot understand what is in front of us without seeing the whole picture. And that's the whole picture, both sectorally and temporally. There is a very well-known Indian fable that was turned into a poem about the elephant, and the 6 blind men. John Godfrey Sachs wrote this poem. It was 6 men of Indostan, to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy his mind. The first approached the elephant, and happening to fall against his broad and sturdy side, at once began to bawl, "God bless me, but the elephant is very like a wall." The second, feeling of the tusk, cried, "Ho! What have we here? So very round and smooth and sharp, to me it's mighty clear. The wonder of an elephant is very like a spear." The third approached the animal, and happening to take the squirming trunk within his hands, thus boldly up and spake, "I see," quoth he, "the elephant is very like a snake." The fourth reached out his eager hand, and felt about the knee. What most this wondrous beast is like is mighty plain, quoth he. 'Tis clear enough the elephant is very like a tree. The fifth who chanced to touch the ear said even the blindest man can tell what this resembles most. Deny the fact who can, the marvel of an elephant is very like a fan. The sixth no sooner had begun about the beast to grope, than seizing on the swinging tail that fell within his scope. I said, quoth he, the elephant is very like a rope. So these men of Indostan disputed long and loud, each in his own opinion, exceedingly stiff and strong, though each was partly in the right, and all were in the wrong. Sectorally, we also need to be able to see a whole picture temporally. I don't know if this is an experience that is familiar to folks. As a firstborn, happened to me all the time. You know, when you are provoked by someone as a child, and then you react. And of course, it is at that moment that an adult walks in, right? And you are now in trouble. And when you say, he started it, what's the response that you get back? I know what I saw. In temporal terms, we call this framing. You know, literally, you have been framed in that situation where we only see one segment of a story that has gone on, that has something that happened before it. So what does our faith do? Why am I telling you about this? What our faith does is faith gives us this ability and the tools to both zoom in and zoom out. We have this guidance from the Imam, which we are so blessed with. We have other things that allow us to find points of leverage to affect positive change. You know, just think about the teacher in your life who changed your life, transformed it, right? We've already talked about this tradition, this wonderful, beautiful tradition of service. Service helps us meet our basic need for meeting and for connection. There are practices and rituals of our faith that increase our awareness and our sense of connection. Our daily prayers, the way we greet each other. And awareness is not a thing to be underestimated. You know, in Islam, it is important that we participate. It is important that we are aware. There is this study that was done in Manhattan, and it was done on hotel maids, the people that clean the rooms in hotels. And they put the hotel maids into two groups. One group was told about the importance of physical exercise for their health and their well-being. The second group was given the exact same lecture as the first about the importance of exercise, but they got a little bit more information. They were told about how their daily work constitutes exercise. You know, that when they are vacuuming and things, that they are actually exercising. With no other change in the activity of either group, after several weeks, when they checked in again, the group that had that greater awareness actually lost weight, and in terms of the baseline physical scores that were taken, improved with nothing more than this additional awareness. Right? I actually had somebody come. So this other thing that that religion gives us, other than these rituals and these things that assist with our awareness, our connection with something that is greater than us. Religion gives us an anchor. I had someone come to me who told me this. They said, you know what? I am spiritual, but not religious. And of course, I didn't understand what that meant. And so I asked, I said, well, I don't understand. What makes you spiritual? And he gave me a list. He said, I am very, aware. I set intentions. I, meditate. I show gratitude. I do these acts of kindness. And of course, I was like, that sounds very much like religion to me. The only difference being this concept of spiritual humility, of having it anchored in something, in believing that you are the source of all this, and to what end. And when we talk about things like happiness, which is the other thing that our faith gives us, our faith gives us happiness. It gives us perspective. It gives us peace. It gives us strength. It gives us resiliency. It gives us community. All of these things together, happiness is elusive. You don't access the sun by staring directly at sunlight. In fact, that can be difficult and damaging. And so we access happiness through all of these other things. How many of you have played this game in your life? This is the game. When I get a job, I will be, when I get into university, I will be happy. When I get a job, I will be happy. When I buy a car, I will be happy. When I buy a house, I will be happy. When I get a promotion, I will be happy. When I move into another house, I will be happy. When I change my job, I will be happy. When I retire, I will be happy. Or what is the other version of this? When I meet somebody, I will be happy. When I get married, I will be happy. When I have kids, I will be happy. When I get divorced, I will be happy. When my kids get married, I will be happy. You cannot win this game. Study after study shows that these things that we want, we get a little bump in happiness and then it just comes back and settles down again. You win a lottery, a bump. 18 months later, your happiness level has been restored. Getting into medical school, same thing. Getting, a tenure as a professor, something you've worked for your whole life, same projection. Writing a book, same projection. There have been numerous studies around this. People who seem to have it all, who then succumb to suicide, to very tragic addictions. And all of us who play that game, the version is when I am rich, when I am famous, when I am admired and respected, when I am loved. And in those studies, right, there is this reality that those who get all of those things, rich, famous, admired, respected, that there is still this vacuum that needs to be filled. What religion does is it helps us to fill that vacuum. And as long as you are alive, there is hope. In every moment, you get to choose who you are. And in every moment, you get to choose whether what you are going to do and who you are going to be leads you closer to spirit or further away. And now we're going to take a couple of minutes, and Salima and I will have a bit of a conversation around what this means for us as individuals, right? And how do we take this universal struggle, this universal hope, that formed the religion of Islam, and apply it in our daily existence. Hello. I have to tell you that I am so excited that we're having this time together. Salima, I am a big fan of yours. I pay particular attention, and you always have such great insights whenever there are the National YZ meetings. And
Oh, that's so kind.
I love that on this topic that I get to have this dialogue with somebody who is not just an alwaiza, but also a professional therapist.
Yeah.
And how incredible that we're able to bring these two things together. I know you're supposed to ask me questions, but I'm going to take advantage of this and
Yeah,
just
of
jump
course.
right in and ask you something that I think the people who are listening to may be interested, but also I'm interested.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to talk sort of at a theoretical level about things like
Mm-hmm.
hope and happiness
Mm-hmm.
and struggle. But the reality is, it's also just as easy to get stuck, right?
Yeah.
And and even when it looks like everything, we've all been through these incredible journeys. And how do you make it real, especially at times like this when the things that are happening to you are completely outside of your control?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's been such a hard year for everyone, right? Which I think is precisely why the topic that you spoke about today is so timely, right? It has been a struggle, and it's been a strange mix, I think, for a lot of us, of struggle and hope and fear and happiness and moments of joy. And it, especially now, I think, we're well past a year into this pandemic. And I think a lot of people are feeling stuck. Certainly in my practice, that's what I've been seeing the last month or two, just people really feeling stuck. Um, and to be honest, I mean, my work really centers on the role of faith, the ways in which faith can inform us and help us find meaning and purpose and be a resource to really help us manage these really challenging moments in life. And also on community. That's the other piece that I work on a lot. And so I think between those two, that's been the answer for most of us, to be honest, this year, right? Like that when we feel stuck, we rely on the people around us to help us kind of get unstuck, right? And maybe that's, the phone call that you make to your grandmother every week, or maybe that's, the ways in which you're planning for, okay, well, it's been this long that I haven't seen my family. As soon as we can, we're planning a family reunion, right? Like I think that sense of, or like the excitement that people have been feeling about Jamaat Khana's reopening, or right, like that community sense of it, I think has been really, really important and helps people feel less stuck, because it's about hope then,
Yeah.
right? The hope that we have to see one another again, the hope that we have to reconnect. I think faith is the other piece that really just plays a big, big part in that. And the constant reminder that struggle and hope come together, right? And actually, that was the question I was going to ask you, was about, I think our faith just offers us so much in the way of conversations around the tension between struggle and hope. And I'm just wondering how you make sense of that, right? Like we have guidance that speaks to both of those things, that speaks to what is the meaning of struggle and how do you make sense of that, and guidance that talks about hope. And so how do those pieces fit together is what I wanted to ask you about.
That is that's a really good question. And it's funny because when I was doing my research, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you look for synonyms and things because and one of the synonyms for hope was faith, right? And belief. But we know from the memoirs of Maulana Sultan Muhammad Shah, where he says that struggle is the meaning of life. And and it's a great question. How do you reconcile them? And there are these terms that I love. There's this term that people use in English, soul searching.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually around, sort of that deep trying to understand. And what faith does is it gives us a vehicle by which to reflect on these really interesting questions that I don't think we're going to come to a conclusion on. But there
Mm-hmm.
is something about a journey, and there is something just about awareness, right? And that's the other thing that our faith does. It gives us a perspective, it gives us awareness. Hazrimam also uses this term sometimes. He talks about spiritual humility, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if I was to try and find a bridge between, hope, right? And struggle, right? Um, and hope is kind of that catalyst that makes the struggle, continue to be a struggle and not a, oh my God, a despondency, there's no point.
Right.
I think it's around that. And like you said, there are things that we do, right? There's environments that we can place ourselves in that allow for that kind of reflection and awareness, right? That make us connected, being in nature. But if you were to ask me, and this is a bad analogy, I know this right now, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. It's kind of like if you're in a valley, right? And you're surrounded by, mountains or hills, and only one of those hills bears fruit, and you are hungry, so you're only going to find the thing you need on one. If you don't have a compass or a sense of which one it is, you can spend a lot of time and a lot of effort going in the wrong direction. And I think sometimes we think it's about how much effort we put into things, right? And I tell this to my kids, right? Just work harder, right? Just suck it up, just try harder. And that's not really always the answer, because you can struggle and take yourself further away, from whatever it is that's going to that you need, which, now we're gonna play tag team here, brings me to a question for you. And it's one that I don't know the answer to, so I'm really looking forward to your insights. When we talk about these, these very personal, very intimate, very, we all experience things differently. And at this time, I'm so grateful that we live in a world where some of the stigma and the misperceptions and misunderstandings around mental health are coming to the forefront. How do we fit that into this conversation?
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's the point, right? Is like that the tension between struggle and hope is ultimately a human issue, right? Like that's at the heart of existential questions from the beginning of human history, right? Like, what is the meaning and purpose of my life? How do I feel a sense of achievement and satisfaction? How do I find happiness? What is joy, right? Like, those are inherent human questions that we just live with. And I think what I like about the way that our faith presents those issues is that it doesn't give us a black or white. Like, it doesn't say you're either struggling or you're hopeful, you're either despairing or you're happy. Like, our perspective on faith, particularly in our tariqa, is one that allows for happiness to sit beside sadness and have them both coexist, knowing that you can derive happiness from certain places and have sadness occur in your life, and that those are not mutually exclusive things. And that's a really nuanced perspective on mental health, right? It's one of the things that we talk about all the time in mental health work. And my favorite example of that is actually like Inside Out, right? Like the Disney movie, which I use. My kids are little still, and so Disney is like the thing in my world. But I use it all the time in my practice. I'll show you. I have the characters
very
sitting
cool.
on my, because I use them all the time. And the reason that I do that is because one of the things that happens at the end of the movie is that memories become complex in the emotionality that they hold, that it's not just a happy memory or just a sad memory. It's like an angry and anxious memory, or it's like a happy and sad memory. And that part of growing as humans is allowing for that complexity of feelings that might seem very opposite sitting together quite well, because that is the nature of human beings. And I think often about Hazrimam's guidance about this idea that you can be sad and that you can be worried, but that you don't have to be unhappy, right? And I think about that a lot. And so I'm curious about what you think about that, particularly around that idea of happiness, right? Because I think that's a thing we chase all the time, and yet it seems so elusive. And so how do you think about that?
Okay, that is a very cool question. And I mean, Salima, you know the research on happiness, right? That
Mm,
in fact, chasing it leads to it being even less accessible, right?
mhm,
And we see that with a lot of things, right? And also Aristotle, that it's the ultimate goal in the end. And I think part of that is that nuanced, complex, um, sometimes not entirely clear understanding of what happiness is, right?
mm,
And I'm going to tell you that one of the things that people ask me about quite frequently, particularly in the pandemic situation, was when they start feeling almost like their emotion is incorrect, right?
mm, mhm,
I'm relieved, or I found these moments of fabulous, or I'm like able to take walks and spend time with my family. um, and then others who, how do I express that when people are losing their jobs and losing loved
mm,
ones, and even memories of loved ones, right? They're tainted,
mhm,
right? They're not, there's happiness and sadness mixed in, but you wouldn't want to trade them for anything.
mhm,
um, but it's a very interesting question. And I think one of the things that I love about even the intellectual tradition of our faith is that, it's not black and white, and our understanding shifts over time. And, you know, I, I don't know if if I'm even answering your question, because I think I lost track of what the question was. But yeah, it is very, it's complex.
mhm,
Um, and maybe that's what it is, right? We live dynamic lives. Creation itself is dynamic.
mhm.
um,
Yeah. I mean, all of that, right? Like, I think,
yeah.
there is a deep irony in the way that we understand happiness in our modern culture
Mhm.
versus, I think, the way that faith talks about it. And even, like, yeah, the intellectual history of humanity and what we know about how humans work, right? And that there is a difference between, I think for me, there's a difference between the idea of happiness and what I call moments of joy,
Yeah.
right? And so, like, a lot of my practice with clients, with my kids in my life, is about how do you cultivate moments of joy? How do you find moments of beauty? How do you really help yourself focus on those little things that are like the little pearls you find along the way? And how do you string those pearls together to make something beautiful and meaningful out of life? And then there's the kind of happiness that I think Hazri Mom talks about, and that, when we read the memoirs of Maulana Sultan Islam that he talks about, and when you read, really, I think people within the broad philosophical traditions of humanity, where it's an internal sense of contentment that comes from a deeper understanding. And it isn't something you can chase, right? It's something that you cultivate slowly over time. It's something that comes from a sense of inner peace, that personal quest and personal journey, right? And I think it's a really important question because it is about, exactly as you said, the struggle, right? Like that part of coming to that kind of contentment is the struggle to look for it, but not in this sort of like hyperactive chasing thing that we do in modern society.
And it's really interesting when we think of our faith practices, but also, the fact that, this life is a moment, right, in
Mm,
eternity. How do we think about our human experience and what we're taking with it, but also, um, there's that sense of detachment, you know, the things that cause us stress and anxiety, right? The things of guilt and of resentment and of
mhm,
anger and of ego, uh,
mhm,
right? And so there is this whole conversation about, you know, who is a person of faith?
mhm,
Not what do you do, but who you are, right? And what does
mhm.
that perspective give you in terms of your lived experience?
Yeah,
So, Salima, I've got to ask you, because
yeah,
these are complicated topics, and and you have children. And so
Mm,
how do we explain to children, right? When children, it's difficult enough when you're an adult and you don't feel a sense of control, or you
mhm,
feel that you have no escape or no choice, or
mhm,
you're just overwhelmed with the things that have happened. Uh, how do you talk to children about things like grief
mm.
and hope?
It's so interesting because as you were talking, I was thinking about one of my favorite sayings of Imam Ali alayhi salam, that says that the aim is to live in the world without letting the world live inside of you, right? Like a boat on the water, right? So that your boat needs to sit on the water and it needs to sail, but if the water gets into the boat, then your boat sinks. And I think in a lot of ways, that's also how I think about parenting and teaching children to cope with emotions, but even also teaching
Yeah.
adults to manage emotion, which is that like our emotions are important and they are messengers that tell us really, really critical things, and that they are actually gifts from Allah. Like our ability to feel emotion is one of the ways in which we've been graced by Allah. And so to not be afraid of our feelings, but also not to let our feelings be the only thing that drives us, right? And that the danger in that is that we drown in those feelings, right? And so what does it mean to learn to ride the wave and to
And we
allow
aren't
yourself?
our feelings, right? Like
Yeah,
that's not
yeah,
who we are.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that they are important and that they matter, but they are passing, right? And so really that idea of riding the wave, I think, is the one that I use the most often. I use it a lot with grief work, right? Where grief just comes in these waves. And the more we try to struggle against it, the more we get pulled under. And so learning that you ride the wave, and like all waves, it will peak and crest and fall, right? Like that's, we need to let it do that. And we need to be okay with riding it in that way and being that boat riding it instead of being the one getting pulled under. And I think that's true of children too, right? Where the goal is to let them feel their feelings without allowing it to inundate them in a way that makes it dysregulated and difficult for them to function, right? And it's a skill. It's a skill that even as adults we still struggle with. It's a skill that we really have to work at, to recognize that we can be in this world and committed to this world and committed to these bodies and these minds and the spirit of being here, while still understanding that this isn't all there is, while still understanding that we are sailing on water rather than being immersed in it. And that it serves a purpose. Like that water is how we journey. Like that is how we get to where we're going. And so we can't pretend like we don't need it. But at the same time, we can't let it take over everything. Right. And I think that that's really critical in how we manage all of these pieces of our lives.
So Salima, how do you know when you need help?
That's such a good question. The psych answer is impairment of functioning. That's a terrible answer because what does that even mean,
Yeah.
right? Like, right. So that, and that's the measure that we use is this has gotten in your way, basically. But that's just a subjective thing, right? Like, what does it mean for it to get in my way? If you're used to kind of functioning with major anxiety and you make it through your day to day and you're still making it to work, does that mean you're okay? Probably not. You're probably not okay, right? And so I think knowing that you need help, some of it is about being really honest with ourselves and like am I actually okay? Am I just functioning because I have no choice? Right? Am I not turning to someone because I'm afraid of what they will
Yeah.
say? Right? And so some of that is really subjective and some of it is really clear. Like, with the pandemic, there are some symptoms that I've been seeing pretty consistently, regardless of who I'm talking to, whether they're clients or just
Yeah.
people that I know, right? Like your your sleeping patterns change, your eating
Uh-huh.
patterns change. You find your emotionality is just a bit more unregulated, right? You're more irritable. You have a harder time kind of getting through the day without yelling at the kids or, kind of getting frustrated by the small things. Like those are all good signs that we're carrying too much, right? That our packs are too full and you need to put down some of that weight somewhere. And so I think some of those things are consistent, but then there's also kind of the not being okay in a spiritual sense, right?
Yeah.
Like that sense of like just the way in which people have just felt so off balance in the last year, and that sense of just things don't feel right. And you can't really explain why. And there's nothing really that like, oh, this major event happened, but just this sense of unease that sits with people and that existential anxiety. I don't know what meaning and purpose mean anymore.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a basic human need, the need for meaning, right?
Yeah.
The need to feel that it matters and that
Yeah.
I matter.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a struggle, right? And I mean, we do see that normally in human life, right? Like it's a normal thing to kind of hit the wall on that every so often. It's a basic human thing, as you said. And then there are times where more of us feel it than not. And this is one of those moments, right? And so that conversation around struggle and hope and happiness is particularly relevant because I think everybody has been having that conversation this past year, whether they wanted to or not.
Yeah, I actually think that's a really great point because we are all in the conversation and we are all searching whether we realize it or we don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some of us have more luxury to do that work than others, right?
Yeah.
And that's also a really real thing.
So how do we help our family, our friends?
I was actually going to ask you the same question. I'm curious about like for you this year, what does that look like? Like, how are you managing the struggle and hope?
This year has been, and I've been fairly fortunate, right? And I recognize that I've been fortunate. From a professional perspective, the work has become more and exploded. And then I feel bad because sometimes I like feel resentful of all these people who get to watch lots of webinars and do lots of learning and hang out with their kids. And I'm like, what is wrong with me? Why am I resenting this? Right. But I think like everybody, I didn't realize how important Jamaat Khana was. In fact, I didn't even consider myself a regular sort of, but the loss of it, I felt like I think a lot of other people felt. When people who, are not necessarily, close family, but like a lot of people, I know people who have passed away, who've had babies, and you just feel like you're not able to connect. It's a different kind of sadness without the supports and things that you're normally able to experience. That's been I think that's been part of a collective experience. And of course, I miss my family and I miss my friends, but invariably when we set up Zoom calls, it's like, oh God, I can't deal with them right now. So it's been a lot of that sort of mixed thing on my end. And I can tell you what has made a world of difference. I think programs like this, I feel in some sense so proud of our community, with the Friday Night Reflections and all of the programming. I've been able to do some programs as a YZ, and I've taught. I can tell you those programs and the connections that you make with people you would not normally meet, right? We've been able to come together. People who live distances have been able to participate. So it's one of these mixed bags. And I'm guessing that's for a lot of folks. Salima, how about like?
Yeah, basically the same, right? Like I have also had more work this year.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine.
My case is, yeah. And so, I mean, some of it is a resentment of like, my kids have been doing school from home and my partner normally does contract work for the most part. And so he hasn't really been working. So he's been with the kids. And alhamdulillah that he's been able to do that. But of course, there are moments where I feel resentful, right? That I want to be able to hang out with my kids and I'm missing this time with them. And so there's that piece of it, but it's also that my work is the kind of work that I would like to see people needing less of, right? Like in a perfect world, you wouldn't need people like me, right? Psychotherapy is because we have a world in which people experience harm. And this year has been particularly difficult that way. And so I have been busier and the work has been heavier. It's been
Yeah.
heavier work than normal. I do a lot of grief and trauma work. Naturally, I work predominantly with racialized Muslim women and racialized queer folks. And so that is the majority of my work, is a lot of heavy trauma work anyway. But this year has been more of a slog, I think, than any of us thought it would be, because it's hard. It's hard to manage grief and trauma and loss while managing a pandemic. And still having to go to work and still having to parent and still have, like, it's not like your life stops, right?
Do you know what
And
I
that's
find?
hard.
Do you know what I find so interesting? I'm like, we started and this conversation is about hope and about happiness. And I feel like all of our conversation has been, you know, how do you address things that can feel like barriers, right?
Yeah.
Which goes to your initial point about how intertwined and how complex this conversation is.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's, even in my work, that's been the joy, right? Is
Yeah.
watching people heal.
Yeah.
And that, this living in this space, being in a pandemic, has in some ways forced people to confront things that we otherwise avoid, and we managed to do so quite well. And there has been a particular kind of beauty in that too. And there has been real healing that has happened that I think wouldn't have happened otherwise. And that's not to minimize the pain and the hurt and, the loss of lives and stuff, just to say that human life is a strange balance of all these pieces.
Isn't it? And even, like, I'm thinking about the things that I'm looking forward to, and I'm like, they feel like such simple things that if 2 years ago you were saying I would ever get excited about, I would be, are you kidding me? Right. But it does, this whole concept of perspective and, and just the dynamic nature of who we are, like how we've adapted, is
I think
such a triumph. Yeah.
That's the heart of all of it, right? Is the human ability to adapt and continually find hope. Listening to Hazri Imam's convocation speech and stuff, I think, like, that's it, right? That humans we're programmed for hope. Like, it's just what we do in the face of insurmountable odds. Often we just find a way to do it anyways, and we find ways to be joyful and to celebrate and to engage. And that's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, isn't it? I mean, in fact, it's almost like the fact that we can do this even in the worst of circumstances, right? What does that say about the human spirit? And about just humanity and creation itself. So
I've spent this year doing a lot of existential work, and I keep going back to Viktor Frankl, who's one of my favorite existentialists. And it really is about how do you, like, the human drive to make meaning and to create beauty, even in the most horrific circumstances, is, I think, the point. Like, and I think that speaks to the nature of the divine, right? That is the seed that is planted in us, to continually be looking for beauty and joy and hope in spite of it all.
And seeing it, right? Yeah. Anyway.
That's a lovely place to end.
This has been just incredible. Yes. I am hopeful, and I've really enjoyed, and for those who are watching, I've been trying to get into the same room as Salima for a while. So this is pretty exciting for me.
I'm happy to do it too. Honestly, I feel like, and these are connections that, inshallah, when the world reopens itself, we can meet in person at some point.
But thank you so much. Even though we're in different cities, this has been fabulous. Yeah, thank you.
So we wanted to thank you for watching. We appreciate you all giving us your time and your attention. Hopefully you found it as wonderful and engaging as we did. We had fun doing it. We hope you had fun being here too. We ask that you take the time to fill out the evaluation. You can see the quick link there, which is bit.ly, and then ISRB evals. And that feedback is super important. It helps us figure out what you want to hear and what you're interested in. And so please do that. And as always, the Jamaati Access Line continues to be open and available for resources and information and assistance of any kind that you might still need. And so you can see there's a number 1-888-536-3599. And of course, the IA Canada newsletter. And you can also sign up for the Al Akhbar. So thank you so much for joining us, everyone. And we will see you, inshallah, in a month or so. Take care.